We're live?
Are we live?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Well, you guys are completely surprising us. We expected like 5 people to this talk, the last talk of the conference in the hotel. We actually joked that whoever was going to end up showing up, we were going to take to the bar and buy the first round. We decided to change our mind on that one.
But just in case, we thought we should still have a talk ready.
Yeah, exactly. So first off, we love code names here. As you guys probably have known that over the years from Microsoft. So I got a copy of Sam Guckenheimer's Agile book, brand new. I'm not even sure if it's out yet.
I don't think it's out because Sam hasn't seen it yet.
Yeah, the author of the book hasn't actually physically seen this yet. The first person that can tell me what we internally call the architectural dependency graphs in Visual Studio Ultimate. What do we call that? What's the code name? You guys, we slip up all the time on these things, and you don't know this?
We could probably do this.
I know the MVPs.
We can do this at the end, and you'd for sure know because
Yeah, she's gonna
definitely going to slip up.
We're probably going to have to come up with a different code name question then. What was the code name for the last Visual Studio 2010? Wow. That's right.
Good job.
I'm not going to buzz, am I? Good. Pass it back, please. Good job, guys. Well, my name is Mark Groves, and I'm the Group Program Manager on Visual Studio Ultimate.
And I'm Tracy Troon, Director of Program Management at Visual Studio Ultimate.
And by the way, she's my boss, so I don't think she would have signed the expense report if I wanted to take you to the bar anyways. So today we're going to talk about architectural dependency graphs and kind of how to get a better understanding of your software. This talk is really focused on both managed and native developers along with software architects. Our demonstrations today are going to be focused on managed code, but everything we're showing is completely the same for native code. We've done the same analysis, but we haven't written a lot of native code recently. Our goals of this talk is to kind of understand the big picture of your architecture and also use this visualization while you're doing development. In Visual Studio 2010, we made this possible, kind of the big picture part of this, but it wasn't all that attainable as you were writing software to come back up from the bottom while you're writing code and getting a better picture from the bottom. That's one of the major changes. And then I'm also going to show you a little peek at how to use some extensibility points that we have in the product to kind of customize and create your own actions on the graph surface. So why are we doing this? Software complexity is everywhere. You guys keep building more and more software. We keep changing frameworks on you. You never really get to start over. How many of you often get to say, start a new project? You have the software you have today. You have to make it evolve and evolve over time. In addition, we're seeing a massive uptake of agile development methodologies in this industry. That makes it a lot more important that everyone on the team has a shared picture of what's going on in the software. No longer are the days that just the software architects had a vision of everything that's going on. Now every single developer on the team needs to have a shared vision of how this part of the system depends on this other part of the system. And the last, pictures are really helpful to communicate. It makes it easy to quickly get a picture. How many of you on your whiteboards have 15 or 20 different diagrams that you've drawn over the last couple months and trying to make that possible to see what was going on in the system? We're going to show you how to create these diagrams from your existing software and share them with your teammates. So what's new for 2011? For those of you, so let me ask this question before. How many of you are already familiar with progression or architectural dependency
There you go.
graphs?
That was the answer to the first question.
Yes. How many guys have already used the architectural dependency graphs in 2010, the Architecture Explorer? Okay, a few of you. Okay, so good. We got some new users also in here. One of the things that was a limiting factor in 2010 is when we did an analysis of your software, we loaded all of that information into memory. And as you know, Visual Studio is a 32-bit application, so there's some headroom issues there. So what we did in this release is really focus on scale to make it so that we can load much larger code bases and do the analysis for your software. The other thing we want to do is make it a lot easier for you to interact with this diagram. This is your diagram. You need to communicate with it and to get in with it and drill in and be able to be comfortable in understanding what's going on in your software. And so we opened up that scenario. And then the other major thing that we did is we wanted developers to stay focused in their code. So we wanted to bring that data to them while they were coding and not bring them off into other diagrams where people get them away from their software. Because if you're like me, when I'm writing software, I want to be in the code. I don't want to be on a bunch of different diagrams. I want to be actually in the software. So the first thing we're going to go is demonstrate how to get the big picture of a software system. Remember which one it is?
Where are we?
What's that? Sorry. Thank you. So for demonstration purpose today, we're going to talk about Fabricam Fiber. Have you guys sick of this demo app yet this week? Okay. So for those of you who don't know what Fabricam Fiber is, basically it's a fictional cable company, and we have a few actions. There's an extranet site that customers can go to see the status of their tickets. And then there's also this intranet site that we're going to navigate through that shows what the actual technicians, what tickets they have assigned. So Tracy, if you go through here, we got the dashboard and the various tickets that are on the web that are open, what customers have, and then also what the employees have. If you go back to the Customers tab, you'll see a little problem we have on this website. There's supposed to be the number of tickets for each customer. Well, this data is not showing up. So Tracy and I are going to kind of pair program and get an understanding of this code base from the perspective, from the top down first, and get a better understanding of what's going on in the software. So Tracy, how do you usually kind of start off understanding a new code base?
Well, so given that you're familiar with this code,
Yeah, I am.
yeah, but I haven't seen it, not really. So normally, I guess I would go and look at unit tests if I'm lucky enough that people have left some unit tests for me to get an understanding of the behavior of the code.
You guys all have unit tests for all of your software, right? Okay. I thought so.
Okay, so I'm going to drill in here and see what I got. Let's see. Top one test.
Your mic.
Is my mic on? Sorry. I can talk.
Battery looks like it's flashing.
I can talk really loud, though.
It's flashing.
At least my
Thank you.
Actually, they probably wish they had a mic.
There we go.
Are we good?
Yes,
There you go.
there we go.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So back to, so the first thing I would do is drill into my tests, my unit tests, and my functional tests, and see if I can get a better understanding of the behavior of my app. So let's see, I drilled in here to the one test. Look, there's a home controller test, and I see I have one test. Yeah. That's not super helpful. So I guess the next thing I would do, I don't know how many of you guys do this, is you get a new code base and you try and figure out what the entry point is. Is that pretty common? Yeah. How long does that take? So for the sake of brevity and time, you're not going to watch me poke around here and try and find the right entry point, because actually, truthfully, I don't actually really know where the entry point is in this app. So the next thing that I would do now that I have my architectural tools is I'd actually go ahead and generate a dependency graph. So I'd go up here into my architectural tab and across and generate a dependency graph for my solution. So I'm going to do that. And
So what's happening here, Tracy?
so as Mark mentioned, we've done some work on scaling. And as he said, we used to load it all into memory. And actually, that just happened so quick, I didn't even get finished talking.
So what did we do there very quickly?
So what we did really quickly was we actually have a database now where the information is stored, and we're able to actually quickly do queries and bring back just the information and just the high-level information. So what you see here.
So we built the code base.
Yep.
We did an analysis, a static analysis of all the code, all the assemblies out of this code base to find the dependencies between them. And then we generated that data and put it in the database and then created this graph so you can get a visualization.
Right. So what we have here now is we have at a high level, we've got the assemblies or the components that match, that contribute into our application. And then for those of you who aren't familiar with dependency graphs, we also take everything that's external or that basically is not your code, and we put it into an area called externals. And what's really interesting about externals is it's a great way to figure out what your platform dependencies are. So you can very, very quickly drill in and start to see what's going on. And in the case of this application, what I've got is I can see that I'm using MVC.
That's good. That's going to be good to know that we're actually using MVC.
Right. And then we also see that we're using the NUnit framework. So there was actually somebody who had a good intention at some point.
They made the right reference anyways.
Yeah, at least they put a reference in there. And then we're using a couple of other injection framework and so on, dependency injection framework. So, so that actually just is helpful in terms of just understanding kind of what we're dealing with. Then, of course, I can also drill in a couple other places. So if I wanted to go into my web component and expand. And the one thing I want to point out here is while I'm doing that, when I do that, those are queries. And actually is pulling that information in from the database. And again, for those people who've actually been using progression before, or the architecture dependency graph before, you'll see that it's basically just as snappy and fast. So the other part is that we've actually made a pretty big investment in our navigation. What we found out is that the navigation that we put in place for Dev 10,
Visual Studio 2010.
Visual Studio 2010. In fact, actually was, I guess, only meaningful to the team.
So that's another way of saying it was a little confusing to everyone.
It wasn't testing very well. So what we've done is we've actually gone back to the drawing board and we've instituted more of a map metaphor. So you'll see that I can do things like zooming. So I'm just scrolling and zooming back. So
you guys are familiar with like Bing Maps and that other company that has a map product. You just zoom in and drag around, and you're able to move things around quickly. That's basically the same interaction model.
Right. And so as I zoom out, too, another thing you'll see is you can see how some of the titles actually start to get larger, trying to help maintain that context. So we basically have some of a semantic notion as we zoom in and out. And then I can also do, again, following that same map metaphor, is I can double-click, and it'll actually center it back onto the screen into a zoom to fit. So let's see. So we've expanded externals, and I think actually at this point, since it's not what we're really dealing with, I can go ahead and delete it.
So so you can just delete things? Like this isn't going to change your code or anything like that? It's just the stuff on this image, right?
Yeah, right.
You just didn't delete all that NUnit good stuff, right?
Right, exactly. No, they're not using it, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's true.
So no, it's actually, this is your graph. This is, you can tailor this to the information that you want to deal with. So when I'm deleting it, I'm just deleting nodes off of this graph. I'm not actually touching any code. I'm not disrupting the database behind it. So like we said, we're going to try and fix, as we saw at the beginning, we're actually going to try and fix the ticket count problem. So we're not going to need to look at the web tests.
On the extranet. Extranet's probably not that interesting.
The extranet. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. There was one more thing I just wanted to mention because it's not necessarily obvious. You can see that some of these links in here, and see how they are varying widths. That actually is what we call our arteries. And basically, the larger and the thicker the link is, or the line is the more of a dependency there is. And so in other situations, if you're actually trying to break a dependency, if you see a very, very light line or a very thin line between two groups or two assemblies, if you will, that's an indication that you have a pretty light dependency, and it might be a candidate for something that you can actually break those apart. That's something you can see really at a glance. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the stuff that I don't think we care about. So I'm getting rid of our extranet, and I'm going to hang on to the test for right now.
Yeah, it'd be good to kind of see visually what, we had this one test, and it was obviously looking in the code, but if we had a larger test set, you could get a sense of what parts of so we got this home controller, see which parts of the system that thing actually touches. So if it was a larger test base, here you can only see we are only touching one of them, the home controller.
Exactly. So right now I can see, as Mark mentioned, I can just see that I've got one test, and it's testing, probably not even very completely the home controller. So actually, Mark, if it's okay, I think I'm going to delete the test because I'm not sure that's going to help us too much.
It's not all that relevant to the architecture, I don't think.
Okay. All right. So now I've sort of narrowed down to the two assemblies that I'm probably going to be working with. And given that I'm actually not that familiar with this code, I'm going to actually let Mark help me now to figure out what else I can get rid of so I can get even more focused on what I want to do.
Sure. So, there's a few pieces in there that's just kind of MVC niceness, and like, for example, the web helpers and app start. Those are all good things, but we can just delete those nodes. They're not really helping us understand the overall architecture.
So delete this generated code?
Sure. You can delete the generated code, that one, app start.
There you go. All right, then.
Okay, but one of the things we're not really seeing here because of the packaging in the assemblies is really the MVC pattern, right? We got these two assemblies, and it'd be nice to kind of get the pattern out, so if we're going to go make some fixes, we can really quickly see where we want to add functionality or where functionality should lie.
Okay. Well, so what I can do then in order to get that view is I can go ahead and these groups, again, as we mentioned, when I delete nodes off this graph, I'm not affecting my code. I'm not affecting anything in the back in my database where my code is. So I can actually go in and I can just remove the parent group, which is just a grouping that we made in the dependency graph around assemblies. So I'm going to remove the group. And I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, we'll remove.
Yeah, you can remove that group also.
We can remove this group too. Okay. So now what I've got is I've got down to a namespace, and I can see I've got my model and view. Actually, I think I can get rid of this one too, huh? Yeah, this one doesn't. I don't need this. This is just initialization code. Okay, so now what I have is I've got the core components, but this isn't looking much like how I'd like to see it for model view controller. So what I can do is I can go ahead and take these guys, and I can.
So you can define your own custom groups around.
I can add. I'm going to go ahead and add a parent group here, and I'm going to call that model. And then, just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to add another parent group here that is controller, and add another guy here that is view. So, okay, so now what I've got is I've got at least some groups, that are representing the model view controller pattern, which makes it a little easier for me to kind of see what's going on. But what I want to do too is I actually happen to really like it to be in the model view controller order, because that's how I think. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually go ahead and drag this around. But I want to show you a couple. This is a couple of other
So
things.
this is also a new feature in Visual Studio 11. You never used to be able to move things around on your graph, and this is a big investment we've done, is to make this more your graph, so you can kind of make the communication the way you want it to be.
Right. So actually, there's two ways to move things around, and I'll show you both ways. We actually have what we call a bump mode. You see? So it'll bump things out of the way.
You can play with this like all day long, just bouncing things around. It's like a little. We
kind of
have like competition of who can make the coolest video game like this way.
It was when we first had this, it was like the toy. Okay, and then I can also, of course, I can just drag it across as well. So if I want to have, and then I can bring it down here.
And Tracy, can you move things between groups?
I can. I can actually drag and drop between. That would take us off script, Mark, though,
I know,
if I did
but
that.
that's okay. You can
So-
do Control-Z all the time.
We could certainly try. So I could actually go ahead and drop that in here, and I can undo it, and it comes back. So we can actually do, again, for those people who played with this before, this is all, we're able to drag and drop and move things around and actually get a diagram into exactly the way you want it. And what we've seen actually is two different patterns of usages. There are definitely the scenarios under which somebody generates a dependency graph, and it's very temporal. You want to see it real quick, and then you get rid of it. Then there's the other people that actually want to use the diagram to communicate or to use as a working document, in which case being able to create the groups that are meaningful to you, creating the layout that is meaningful to you, is really critical and super helpful.
So quickly there, we were able to reverse engineer this existing system that Tracy didn't have much context about, and get a quick layout of what's going on, what depends on what, and we could use that to reference back as we start enhancing this software or fixing bugs in it. So hopefully that came across, that you quickly get a good picture of software pretty quickly. So the next thing we're going to switch into is how do these graphs help you make the right fix? Usually whenever it takes a lot of time to find the part of the software that actually has the problem in it. Well, we say that these graphs can actually help you find the problem quickly.
Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Sorry, hang on. Sorry. I just saved it. Okay. All right. So now we have actually, I'm just going to take you back real quick. So if you recall, what we're actually trying to fix is the fact that there's no requested tickets count up here. So somewhere we've got actually a problem. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is actually start to drill in. Now that I've gotten the picture I want, I'm going to start trying to figure out what's going on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is expand. And hopefully, can you guys, sorry, I'm going to not expand that one because I don't need to do that right now. Can you all see that?
Drill
we
in
have it
probably a little
big
bit.
enough? Huh?
There's a screen right here. So you can drill in.
All right, there we go. Okay, so if I go up into my customer controller, I can click on that, and I can see, if I hover over my line, I can see that it references, it has one line, and it references, I apologize, it's not behaving. It actually, I can navigate, and it takes me down to the customer repository, or sorry, the data model behind. That actually does seem a little odd, because I know that actually in order, I'm expecting, and this is also because Mark told me because he knows how the app works, is that in fact, I should be seeing not only just a reference to the customer repository, I should also be seeing a reference to the ticket repository as well, because that's where I'm going to...
If you expand the models node, you should be able to see more details in there.
Okay. Or we could,
We'll just zoom into the models. You'll see that there's a few other names or classes in there, including the service ticket. We need a reference to that service ticket. We're not getting service tickets for this application.
right. So now that, since we can see that we're, visually, we can see that, and then we can also see over in our Solution Explorer, I want to actually just point out a alternate navigation is now with Visual Studio 11.
We're not very good at the real names.
That I can actually look also at navigate in the Solution Explorer, and I can get actually quite a similar view in a tree control as I get in the graph, in the visual graph. And the reason for this is actually we have taken the same way that we actually generate these dependency graphs and look at those relationships. We've actually integrated that into the Solution Explorer. Because we found that many people actually, depending on what you're doing and depending on how deep you are in code, it actually makes a lot more sense to be able to navigate those dependencies or relationships from within. So I can do things like I'm in the customer's controller and I can right-click here, and I'm able to actually do some fairly comprehensive navigations. Besides contains, I can also look at base types, derived types, and it is used by. And it really depends on the type as to what other types of relationships that are exposed here. So it's actually pretty cool that we can do that now.
And this works for both managed and native code. So.
Yep.
So who's the native code developers in the room? Oh, okay, good.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually go to the...
So you just navigated right from the graph into the code?
Right. So I do F12. Again, that's another navigational change that we found that was working pretty well, that wasn't working as well in Visual Studio 10 is for us to basically carry the same metaphors. So I can F12 into the customer controller. So what I'm going to do now is kind of take a look, and let's see. We know that the index is the customer, the listing that we were looking at, and it looks like I got a little love note here. To whom it may concern, need to return customer and their ticket count. Maybe this code might work.
Yeah, I'm not sure who did that. We probably should look at...
Probably the same person who didn't write the test.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. So it looks like actually that there is some code here that is looking at pulling in the ticket repository and running a query that basically returns all the tickets that are associated with that particular customer. I don't know, Mark, does this look like the right code?
Yeah, we should try that out.
Okay. Well, so let's see. We control. Now, let's see what else. I think that I noticed there were a couple little
notes
other notes here that say expand me, so I think I'm going to...
This is the easiest bug fix ever.
This is all I can handle. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to, and let's see, what else? Oh, expand me too. Yeah. That.
I thought you said you didn't know anything about this code.
I had to be somewhat prepared in case this many people showed up. Okay, so it looks like I have the code under control. I think I still am going to need to take a look at that page, though.
So if you haven't seen, the Solution Explorer also has an I'll search now, and it'll limit down the data all the way down into the method. So, by the way, you can clap at any time. We're not limiting that.
I will say that the new search in the IDE and the Solution Explorer is about the most rocking thing that we're doing, including even our stuff. Okay, so it looks like, actually, it looks like somebody didn't reset completely. So I'm going to go ahead and put a count in here. so that I can actually print. I've got a list now, as you saw with my query, but now I can just put the count on that report. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And for those of you who actually have built using MVC, you know that you actually have to close this before you hit F5. And now let's go ahead and run it. And all things being equal, it will hopefully.
I'll be confident.
I will. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go over to customers.
Oh, looks like we fixed our bug.
I got my tickets.
Imagine that.
All right. So now
So it looks like we fixed it. So you're going to write a bunch of unit tests now, right?
yeah.
Up on stage, we're going to watch you do
Yeah,
that?
right. So
Okay.
we are.
Yet again, this is why there are no unit tests.
We will before we really check it in.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so actually, I was a little remiss in starting. I actually have also under my work, I can see that I had a task, and I should have actually put it into in progress. I don't know if for all of you guys who haven't also seen some of our new features around task management and code review, you're going to see just a little tinge of it because we're really proud of that.
Jamie Cole did a really
Yeah.
cool demo earlier, I think 9 o'clock this morning, so you can watch the recording if you didn't get a chance to catch that.
Right. Okay. So now what I've got is I've got this bug that was assigned to me. I'm getting ready to put it up for code review, and one of the things that happened or is true for us, I don't know how many of you work in distributed teams. How many people work with teams in different time zones?
Good bit of you.
Yeah. So I think that's becoming more and more common. On our team particularly, we work with India, China, and we have a team in the UK.
And Denver.
So we pretty much are now, we're getting pretty close to a 24-hour situation. So that starts to mean that you've got even more need to be able to communicate, and pictures are often a great way to communicate when you're not able to talk to somebody face-to-face or answer and clarify. So what I'm going to do actually is show you how I can build up a graph from scratch that I'm going to use to communicate what my changes were.
How many of you have to document your code changes in some form? UML, diagram, Visio, something or other? A few of you? Okay. So I said have to. I didn't say you did.
All right.
Yeah, well, not very many, I don't think. How many actually document their code? A few. Yeah.
Have we got a tool for you?
Yeah, no.
All
It
right.
slices, it dices.
Exactly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, and as Mark mentioned, one of the other focuses we've had is being able to build from the bottom up and to communicate. So I'm going to go ahead and looking at in the Solution Explorer, I'm going to drag over the customer's controller. I also have added the reference and the code so that we'd actually be accessing the service ticket repository. And then, of course, I made changes. Actually, I just uncommented some changes that somebody left for me on the index report. So I'm going to drag those over onto this graph. And you see we got the relationships as well. So now what I'm going to do is actually go in here onto the service ticket repository, because that's what I actually added. And I can add a new category, which is new code. Okay?
Or uncommented code or something
What's that?
like that.
Oops. Ah. All right, so what I have now is a new category here. So I can go and select that category, and I can I can click click, and I can change the background just so it stands out a little bit better. So I'm going to pick.
So how many of you guys use code review today in your organizations? Good number, good. Do you think it'd be helpful to kind of be able to send out a picture of your changes to your team so they don't have to drill through your code the whole time? Or I should say on the other side, when you get code reviews, would it be nice to have a picture of the changes before you have to spill through it? Okay.
Okay, so I picked my favorite color. And
Boy,
actually,
I'm really happy I'm colorblind.
I'm sure most of you saw Jason Xander's talk. Most of you guys saw Jason talk. So this is my favorite thing to do for Jason, is to go ahead and pick pink for my colors, because he loves pink. And
I don't think you're supposed to tell people that.
he mentioned it actually in his keynote. Okay, so now I've highlighted the change, because that's my addition, and I've created a new category to sort of highlight that new code. Now what I'm going to do also is I want to or put a comment or a note in there to mention what I did. So you can see here I'm hovering.
What's on this hovering toolbar?
So actually up above, I actually have a couple of things I can do from here. I'm able to create some new links. I'm able to create a node of the same type. And then I'm also able to add a comment node. So I'm going to create a comment here. It says, needed to add a reference to ticket repository and fix link or index report. Okay, I probably would write a little bit more. It might not be enough. But anyway, so now what I've got is I've actually got I've got a picture here that shows briefly a relationship. So at a quick glance, you can see what's going on, and I can highlight what I added, as well as leaving a note. So you can imagine also being able to put code and such in here, so that you can actually take that, save that graph, include it in your code review, and have that as a reference point for your team members, and particularly useful when you have remote teams or you're not able to actually talk to a person and have an over-the-shoulder code review, as many people are able to do or not do it nowadays.
Cool. So you want to summarize?
Okay, so what we saw being able to navigate between the diagram and code, and then also and seeing how smooth that was, as well as being able to navigate in the Solution Explorer much the same way as you navigate in your graph. So you can move back and forth in a way that makes sense for the scenario that you're in. And then finally, being able to create a diagram from scratch and making, once again, it to look just the way you want, to put the notation that you want on there, so that you can clearly communicate what you intend to communicate with your colleagues or others.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. So the next thing I'm going to show you is some new extensibility points on the dependency graphs. With Visual Studio 2010, we had a lot of capabilities, but we actually did not open up any of the extensibility points. And as I mentioned earlier, we now have this database backing with all this great information about the dependencies in your software. And although we think we're going to deliver some great value here, we want to open this up so people can add their own queries and add their own actions. So back on the graphs that Tracy was showing, one of the things that you may not have noticed is we have this little context menu here called Show. I'm not sure that's going to be the end name, but each one of the actions on Show is a custom extension. If I went into the extension manager here, you'll see a couple of different V6 packages that are extensions that my team wrote to kind of show some different ways of getting data on and off the graph. Each one of these things is dynamically loaded in MEF, so they're pretty actually lightweight to write, and we load them up pretty quickly. How many of you have ever tried to extend Visual Studio? I'm sorry. No, it's all seriousness. If you've done this before Visual Studio 2010, it was non-trivial. The entry point was pretty complicated. But one of the things that we're utilizing now is both the V6 extension and using MEF. So I have an extension here that we're going to build. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of write a little extension that shows how to hide private methods, right? Members. It's pretty simple. And really the point of this demonstration isn't to kind of go through all the code that it takes to write the analysis, but really want to kind of make you aware that we're going to make this extension point available to you and third parties so that you can start kind of writing your own analysis over your code bases. Who knows what you want to write, some things that we'll probably never think of. So first thing, if I go into the extension, how many of you are already familiar with V6? Visual Studio Extension? Oh, okay, no one. Okay, great. Basically, it's a project type you add inside of Visual Studio, and it comes with a few things. The most important part is this V6 manifest. This is basically a lightweight packaging mechanism that makes it possible to load up Visual Studio extensions. There's a few things you need to provide in here. I need to name it, provide version information. You can also go in a lot more details of license and icon and such. We want to do where we're going to load this target, so which Visual Studio SKU this is loadable in. And then the last thing we really need is which assets we're going to load up. So in this case, I've written a new MEF component that is going to do this action on the graph. So I just loaded that, added that asset into the packaging. All the real code is over here in my other project. It's just an assembly. And I call that filter private nodes. There's a few references I pull in here. And I'm sure these names will change before we ship. See, you also could find the code name right there. But one thing you need to implement is basically an export. This is a MEF export that tells Visual Studio that we want to import this if you're an iGraph window query. You implement the interface. There's just a few methods you need to implement here. First, there's initialization. In this case, the only thing we're really doing that's interesting is pulling in the graph object. So we basically want to get a handle to that graph information that we were shown earlier, so that you can get all the information on the nodes and links that are happening. For this demonstration, we're going to both make it always visible and always enabled. The other thing is there can be a lot of different extensions here. So, of course, I just wrote this one, so it's got to be priority 1. This can get rather complicated, the query status. This is what happens whenever you right-click on something. So if I right-click on a class or a namespace or an assembly, this is where you'll get that information, so you can decide if the action you're writing is relevant to the thing that the user selected. In this case, I'm just going to be hiding private nodes, so I want it always visible. It's not really contextual. I want to show what text shows up on the actual context menu. And then the last thing we're going to do, this is the invoke method. This is the thing that is the important part. So we have in here basically a little query where I want to get back all the nodes and the members and find out if they're hidden or not and get their visibility, basically get their visibility state. So we're basically trying to find out on the graph what their state is, what's on the graph, what information's there. And then we just loop through all the information. If they're already hidden, we make the show menu available, and if they're available, we turn it around. So like I said, it's not really all that important, the example. What we're going to show you here is, in a few lines of code, I wrote an extension to parse down this information. So now I can run this in an instance of Visual Studio to test out my extension. So what's happening right now is we're loading up an experimental instance of Visual Studio. The extension has been loaded. I'm just going to bring up this little WinForms template. And as Tracy showed earlier, we create a graph. Just grab some of this information, drag it on the graph. So now let's see if our extension is. So if I go in the Show menu, we have our new Hide Private Members method. So what's going to happen when I click this, that execute method is going to get called, and we're going to filter out the information. So as you can imagine, you can get a lot more robustly from this. So I can go and ask the database for more information. There's a lot of different scenarios doing dependency analysis. They can get interesting. So I can go in and bring them back now. So it's just a really quick demonstration to show we have this entry point into all this great graph information that you guys can write custom extension points for. So hopefully that was pretty quick and simple. And you'll see some value once you guys get these bits and you can start playing around and going through our database and figure out what's interesting. I'm sure you're going to find out some pretty powerful stuff. So hopefully today you got a sense of how using architectural dependency graphs can both be valuable in the big picture, trying to understand the large picture of the story, and also while you're writing software and getting into the bottom-up picture of what's going on. You got to make sure that you're making the right fix and stop wasting time and doing things that you need to actually see the picture of what's going on. And then lastly, I showed you how to write a custom action to make it possible so you can do some more advanced things that maybe we don't actually provide in the box. So we're going to take some questions at the mics. I just wanted to quickly go through here. Of course, we're the last talk of the conference, so you'll have to catch all these talks on video, but Doug Newman did a great talk on application lifecycle management in the cloud that you guys all got a little ticket for. And then Aaron and Peter did a talk yesterday on what it means to work in an agile team using TFS. We did our IntelliTrace talk yesterday. Hopefully, maybe some of you have seen that. If not, catch the video. And then the talk I mentioned earlier with Jamie Cool that showed a lot more of the new developer features available for Team Foundation Server source control, work, and also task-focused development and code review. Well, the hands-on labs, and I believe Brian Keller just made that virtual machine available this morning, so you can download and get all the hands-on labs and all that. Our documentation actually is pretty good. Read the manual. It's actually not that bad. And thank you. We love to hear some questions and get some feedback. Could you guys please go to the mics if you have questions? I'm sorry, I know you're a little packed in here, but we're recording this, so we want to make sure we catch the questions on the mics. Could you back up 2 slides? Sure. Where am I going?
Oh, so the link.
The link, okay, sure.
So how does this scale? You have basically thousands of classes and hundreds of things.
I'm sorry, could you come up to the mic so we can hear you? I'm sorry.
This is really bright.
How does this all scale when you have solutions with thousands of classes, hundreds of namespaces?
Yep.
And you want to get an impression what you have in your solution?
So one of the things that, this is a really simple application. But when we do that cracking, we throw all of the information of the dependencies into the SQL database locally. And then we only are getting the level of information you're drilling to. So for example, if you have 100 assemblies, then that's all that's going to be on the graph originally. And as you expand out, we go and get more and more data as you drill into. So depending on what you actually go into is what you pay for as far as loading into memory. We are able to actually generate graphs now for all of Visual Studio. And we do that, yeah. So we don't do that in the IDE, as you can imagine. You can't load Visual Studio as a solution. But we have a command line processor that is available, and you can integrate that part of your build system and basically generate all the data and then point the graphs at that database. So we do that internally to get an understanding of all the dependencies inside of Visual Studio. And now we're actually able to load a graph in Visual Studio for Visual Studio.
Both managed and native.
Yes, both managed and native. It takes a few hours to crack all the assemblies, as you can probably imagine. The next question?
I think this man is
Oh,
first.
sorry.
So we have a Silverlight application, so Silverlight and web side. Do we handle anything that can handle that client dependency?
Yeah, so one thing that all of our analysis to date is static analysis. So we're doing an analysis on the static dependencies that we can determine. So any dynamic dependencies that are happening, we're unable to pick up, although we hope to in the future start writing more analyzers that we can push that data into the database about these dynamic dependencies.
Okay.
We have some people who've played around with taking IntelliTrace logs and laying them on top of our static diagrams, which are pretty cool.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. We can take an IntelliTrace log of what's happened in the code and then turn around and put that as facts into the database. And so you can actually see what's really happened.
This might actually relate to the previous question then. You mentioned both managed and native are supported. What about something a lot more dynamic like the JavaScript-oriented Metro-style applications? What happens if you try and generate a diagram for those?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have analyzers for JavaScript yet.
But it'd be a pity because, to me, almost the nature of JavaScript means it's going to be the most unstructured, the most violent,
It's
the
a
most
target-rich
difficult to
environment.
understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of discussion around the team about that because we all agree that it's a really good scenario. I think what we're hoping to be able to do is between for the probably not for the next release, but between we should be able. We're actually setting ourselves up to be able to deliver a little bit on a little bit more regular cadence and incremental value. So yeah, that's pretty far up the list actually.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. So I'm keying in on the word yet. So I think you're saying that you are thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah, that's why I say it's pretty far
so-
up our list, and Mark and I get to control the list.
Yes.
The other question I had was, is this available, this version of Visual Studio for a developer preview available? Because that's not what is loaded on our...
Yeah, so Visual Studio Ultimate is on the key fob, the little USB key fob that you got. We are showing a little newer bits than you have on the CTP, like yesterday's bits. But I just wanted to give you a vision of where we're going. So you'll definitely be seeing this stuff in the upcoming beta. But all the dependency graphs are available in the CTP. You just have to use the Visual Studio Ultimate install that is on the USBs, or you can download from MSDN, although we would like you to use the ones on the USB since we don't have to pay for that.
My question is about the layer diagrams and how the performance improvements made to the dependency graphs apply to the layer diagrams. For example, we had a problem with scaling of layer diagrams to large projects as well.
Yeah, we actually haven't done a huge amount of investment on the layer diagrams in this release yet. Although, as Tracy mentioned, we are setting ourselves up to be more incremental after we get through this release. So we're definitely going to put that and prioritize that in the future. So unfortunately right now, no major investments.
But we do recognize that that's actually...
Yeah, we definitely recognize that that's an issue.
You mentioned that you're using this as a bottom-up tool, but what about as a design tool? I mean, not reading existing code to write my architecture as an architect and then generate the basic whatever.
So you want to generate from something like UML, or do you want to? So we do have UML tools, and we do have code generation in our UML tools. We just didn't talk about that today. Now, what Tracy did show a little bit, and it's a much lighter weight than doing UML, is being able to take and just add nodes. So for example, she can add a node of class type right on there and document. Now, it's nowhere near the richness of a UML diagram, but if you were trying to just basically take existing code and add maybe a few classes, a few methods, you can kind of get away with quick documentation of what you're trying to do. We do not have any code generation from this diagram, but we do have that integrated in our UML diagrams.
I guess extension probably can generate the code.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. Because once you get a handle to that extension, you really can do whatever you want. I mean, there's no limitation there.
What about this question? What about just a minor code change, suggested code change?
Exactly. So you're saying just a minor, like,
Something, adding a function called,
sure, absolutely. You could just add a few nodes on there.
arrows and
Exactly. You can create
Yeah,
arrows
because
between
I can
things.
actually do this too. Let's see. I can say, I can create a link to that too.
So it's still a rudimentary design tool. What we're really trying to do is some lightweight edits so you can communicate. So it in no way is going to compete with a full-blown design tool.
Does everybody on my team need Ultimate to make this work?
So yes and no. We're not really talking about SKUs fully here, but right now our high-level plan is to create diagrams, to basically design things, reverse engineer an initial diagram. You're going to need Ultimate. But Visual Studio Pro and Premium will be able to read, open, and interact with the diagrams. They just won't be able to create one from scratch.
Cool. I was wondering on the native code analysis for C++. I was wondering if this is the same parser in Lexer that's being used for the compiler, or is this a custom parser? Just because C++ is not that easy to parse, and
Yeah.
if you write more complicated stuff, so I'm wondering if it would stumble over more modern, complicated C++ code, or...
So the question is, are we using the same technology to parse the code?
Basically the compiler front end, if it's
Yes
just
and
used
no.
for-
Yes and no. Yeah, we're using partially what's used, and I believe I'm not an expert. Neither of us are, because that work actually happens to happen in China. But we're using the front end as well as some additional analysis tools because we actually have to there's some dependency information that we can't get actually, so we have to use a couple of tools actually to get that information to get a full picture.
Thank you.
If that's all the questions, thank you so much. Thanks for coming to Build.
Yeah. Wow.
Hope you guys had a great conference.